Imagine waking up tomorrow, checking your phone, and finding a single headline shaking the entire world. The strait is closed. You might think it is just distant news that doesn't concern you. But wait! Within just 2 days, everything around you will begin to change. Gas prices will skyrocket. Stock markets will crash as screens bleed red. Supermarket shelves will empty of bread and milk. And factories will stop producing medicine, cars, and phones falling exactly like a row of dominoes. But why all this panic? It isn't a bomb or a world war. It is merely a narrow waterway, no wider than the distance between two neighboring cities. This scenario nearly became a reality in early 2026, when the entire world felt a violent economic tremor because a single route was disrupted. The terrifying truth is that our planet depends entirely on just 5 passages choke points through which all our essentials flow. If any one of them were to stop, our modern life would be thrown back decades. So, what are these 5 passages? What threatens them today, forcing the world to hold its breath? This is what we will explore in this video, but before we dive in, if you're new to the channel, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe. Before we talk about maps and statistics, let me ask you a very simple question. What do you own right now as you watch this video? Your phone was manufactured in Asia and shipped across the Indian Ocean. Your shirt was woven by hands in Bangladesh or Vietnam. And your car's fuel was likely extracted from the depths of the Arabian Gulf and shipped in giant tankers through a narrow strait only a few kilometers wide. The staggering truth is that 90% of everything we use in our lives travels by sea, and although the oceans are vast, all ships are ultimately forced to pass through specific bottlenecks or choke points. Why should you care about oil prices even if you don't own a car? When tensions rise in one of these 5 passages and oil prices climb, a domino effect begins. You won't just pay more at gas stations, but your electricity bill, plane tickets, and transportation costs will increase. Even the price of bread on your table will rise because transporting wheat has become expensive, and even medicine in pharmacies will be affected as shipping and manufacturing costs soar. Therefore, waterways are not just maritime or geopolitical matters, they concern every one of us. In the first place comes the Strait of Hormuz. Imagine that this narrow passage, which is no wider than the distance between two large neighborhoods in a city, is what simply allows the world to breathe economically. It is the meeting point between the Arabian Gulf and the rest of the world. Located between Oman and Iran, it is so narrow that if you stood on one of its shores, you might see the other side. However, its importance lies not in its size, but in what passes through it. Why does the world tremble if things get tense here? It is like the global energy faucet. Imagine that for every 5 cars driving in the world, one of them runs on fuel that passed through this strait. 1/5 of the natural gas used for heating and generating electricity in distant countries also originates here, particularly from nations like Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and the UAE in 2024. The average flow of oil through the Strait of Hormuz reached 20 million barrels per day, a massive figure equivalent to about 20% of the world's total consumption of petroleum products, representing more than a quarter of the total global maritime oil trade. But it does not stop at oil. About 1/5 of the world's total liquefied natural gas (LNG) trade also passes through the Strait of Hormuz. All these giant tankers carrying the world's wealth are forced to navigate a very narrow passage, literally within range of missiles and military tensions. If someone decides to turn off the faucet or if movement is disrupted, not only will the ships stop, but the lights will go out and factories will grind to a halt in many places around the globe. The Strait of Hormuz is the vein that pumps life into modern civilizations, and any pressure on this vein, however slight, is felt by the entire world in seconds. Is the picture starting to become clear as to why all eyes are fixed on this specific small spot? Hormuz and the stock markets. As soon as skirmishes began in early 2026, the markets were struck by panic. Imagine that the price of a barrel of oil jumped from $73 before the crisis to surpass the $100 mark in just a few days. Not only that, but the price of gas used by Europe to heat its homes rose by about 30% after Qatar halted gas exports. And shipping costs skyrocketed. All this while the strait had not even been fully closed yet. Well, what if the strait were closed completely? Here we move from a crisis to a definitive catastrophe. If traffic stops entirely, the world will start running in every direction searching for a single drop of oil, and nations' strategic reserves will deplete rapidly. Imagine what would happen to the money of investors and companies. The first victims would be the stocks of airlines, factories, and transport companies, which would collapse immediately because their fuel had become more expensive than gold. Factories stop, companies report losses, and investors flee, selling their shares in a panic. Hormuz and the markets. In less than 2 hours, astronomical sums trillions could vanish from the global stock exchange. Not because the companies failed, but because the gasoline that runs planet Earth was cut off. There is a point here that many overlook. The Gulf is not just a gas station. It is also the world's restaurant in an indirect way. How? The region is one of the largest producers of agricultural fertilizers. If Hormuz stops, fertilizers will not reach farmers across the globe, meaning fewer crops, which ultimately leads to bread disappearing from shelves or its price rising insanely. In March 2026, the traffic that used to reach 138 ships per day dropped on some days to 0. Hundreds of ships were stuck inside or waiting outside, as the entire world watched this narrow passage while holding its breath. In summary, the closure of the Strait of Hormuz does not just mean you won't find fuel for your car. It means the entire world could enter an economic and nutritional coma because literally everything is linked to this small passage. Did you ever imagine that a single waterway could control the price of bread in a distant country? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Now, the Strait of Malacca. Imagine we are looking at the map between Indonesia and Malaysia. There, where the sea narrows significantly and ships pile up. If Hormuz is the energy vein, then Malacca is the highway that never rests. Imagine that a quarter of global trade passes through this narrow corridor. Nearly 94,000 ships cross it annually, carrying approximately 1/3 of the world's goods and a quarter of the global automobile trade. It is the primary artery connecting the factories of Asia, China, Japan, Korea with the rest of the planet. Here lies a compelling story. China, a global economic superpower, relies on this strait for 80% of its oil. The Chinese themselves call this situation the Malacca Dilemma. Why? Because they realize that any political or military tension in this narrow spot means strangling China economically within days. China has not stood idly by. It has spent hundreds of billions of dollars searching for alternative land routes or other passages. But the bitter truth is that no real alternative currently exists that matches the speed and capacity of the Strait of Malacca. The Strait of Malacca is the sword hanging over the head of the Chinese and global economies. Any incident there, whether piracy, which is prevalent in that area, or political conflict, would mean the halting of factories in Asia and empty shelves all over the world. The Suez Canal and Bab al-Mandab, the double gateway between East and West. In 1869, a French engineer named Ferdinand de Lesseps succeeded in achieving an ancient dream, carving a 193-kilometer canal through the heart of Egypt's sands. This canal linked the Red Sea to the Mediterranean, saving ships from a terrifying and incredibly long journey, approximately 9,000 kilometers that they previously had to sail by, circumnavigating the entire continent of Africa in a grueling trip that consumed extra weeks and tons of fuel. From that day on, the world became smaller and faster. Today, the Suez Canal is not just a waterway. It is the global supermarket. Through it passes 12% of all world trade, with goods valued between $3 billion and $9 billion crossing every single day. In short, it is the most vital route for transporting everything from clothing and electronics to fuel. Do you remember what happened in March 2021? A giant container ship, the length of 4 football fields, got wedged sideways right in the middle of the canal. In just 6 days, more than 430 ships piled up behind it, like a massive traffic jam on a main highway. The world was losing nearly $10 billion a day, and everyone realized then that store shelves in Europe and Asia could go empty because of a single ship stuck in a single canal. The Suez Canal is the greatest proof that the entire global economy is interconnected. A thin thread of water in Egypt, which, if disrupted, throws the calculations of factories and traders from China to America into chaos. The Strait of Bab al-Mandab. Everyone knows the Suez Canal, but in truth, it doesn't run the show alone. There is a secret southern gate called the Strait of Bab al-Mandab. This narrow passage lies between Yemen and Africa, serving as the key that no ship can use to enter the canal without passing through. Imagine that it controls a massive portion of world trade estimated at billions of dollars. At the end of 2023, Houthi attacks on ships began in Yemen, and suddenly the world discovered just how fragile it is. The world's largest shipping companies and even giant oil firms said, "Stop, the area is no longer safe," and decided to redirect their routes away from the region. The result was very difficult. The Suez Canal was severely affected, and the number of ships passing through it dropped significantly, leading to Egypt losing billions of dollars in canal revenue. Ships were forced to sail around the entire continent of Africa, an incredibly long route that adds many days to the journey and consumes an enormous amount of fuel. This significantly drives costs up to insane levels. But the question remains, who pays the price? You might think that shipping companies are the only ones affected, but in reality, you and I pay the price. When shipping costs increase, the prices of goods in stores rise, and poor countries are hit the hardest because they rely on imports for their food supply. The Suez Canal and Bab al-Mandab are not just waterways. They are the world's lifeline. Recent events served as a wake-up call, telling us that any disruption in this small region could tip the scales of the entire global economy. Now, the Bosphorus Strait. What does the Bosphorus say? Whoever rules Turkey rules the two oceans. Istanbul is the only city in the world that spans two continents, and right through its heart runs the Bosphorus Strait, the passage that connects the Black Sea to the Mediterranean. The Turkish straits, comprising the Bosphorus and the Dardanelles, represent the only waterway connecting the Black Sea to the Mediterranean, and transit through them is complicated by strong currents and sharp turns. About 3.7 million barrels per day of crude oil and petroleum products cross the Turkish straits, representing about 5% of the total global maritime oil trade. However, the importance of the Bosphorus goes beyond oil. It is the gateway through which massive grain exports from Russia, Ukraine, and Kazakhstan emerge. Millions of tons of wheat and corn that feed Africa, the Middle East, and parts of Asia cross through this narrow strait every year. Turkey is well aware of the value of this card. Under the historic Montreux Convention, Turkey has the right to restrict the passage of warships during times of war, making the Bosphorus an exceptional geopolitical asset in Ankar's hands. And in fifth place, the Panama Canal, the American shortcut that threatens both the climate and politics. In the past, ships wanting to travel from the east of America to the west had to circumnavigate the entire continent of South America, a long and dangerous journey. However, in 1914, humans created an engineering miracle and carved a canal through the jungles to connect the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. Today, this canal has become the primary passage for the cars, grains, and goods we use daily, with billions of dollars in trade passing through it. Unlike the Suez Canal, which is filled with seawater, the Panama Canal relies on fresh water from surrounding lakes to lift and move ships across. The major problem now is climate change. Over the past 2 years, drought has struck the region and the water has dried up. So, what happened? The canal was forced to reduce the number of passing vessels and prevent very large ships from crossing because the water was no longer sufficient, causing trade movement there to decline significantly and alarmingly. Alongside the water issue, a political problem has emerged. There is concern in America regarding Hong Kong-based Chinese companies managing some ports at the canal. This has led President Trump to hint at the idea of reclaiming American control over the canal to protect it from Chinese influence. Today, the Panama Canal lives under a dual siege: the skies, which no longer reign enough to operate the canal, and politics, which has turned the canal into a battlefield between superpowers, America and China. In your opinion, which of these passages is the most dangerous to the stability of our daily lives if it were closed completely? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Thanks for watching. If you found this video insightful, don't forget to like and share it. Until next time.